All right, hello and welcome to Southern College of Optometry's May webinar on scholarships and contract seats. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you are all staying safe and healthy. My name is Avery Cunningham. I am a Student Services and Admissions Officer here at SCO. I'm one of the admissions team members who will be answering your questions and participating in the admissions process. Before we get started, I ask that we all use proper Zoom etiquette by keeping microphones muted unless speaking, limiting background noise, and respecting all of this webinar's attendees and facilitators. We will have time for questions towards the end of the webinar, but in the meantime, if you do have any questions or concerns that need immediate attention, please use your chat feature to communicate with us. Today, we'll be discussing scholarships, contract seats, and all the options available to students to reduce their tuition cost. Mr. Joe Hauser, VP of Student Services, will open with a brief overview of the scholarship process here at SCO and the eligibility for regional contract seats. Then, one of our current recipients of a competitive scholarship will discuss their experience and the impact the scholarship has had on their education. This webinar is being recorded and will be free and available to view starting next week on our website. And with that, I turn it over to you, Mr. Hauser.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm Joe Hauser, as Avery mentioned, Vice President for Student Services. And one of the common questions we have, being a private college of optometry, not a state school, regards do we have an in-state, out-of-state tuition, et cetera, et cetera. And we really just have the one tuition that's called our non-regional tuition, which is currently set at a little over $39,000 a year. But we're very fortunate to have participating states outside of Tennessee as well to help fund offset student cost. And then above and beyond that, we also have a very competitive endowment for scholarships that we allocate each year to entering classes. And typically these are scholarships that are held for all 4 years, as well as the contract seats. So it's not a one-time only aspect. So happy to kind of go through the process with you. So just what are the scholarships based on? It's different scholarships will focus on different things, but by and large, academic achievement, which generally speaking would be GPA and OAT. And what we look at with GPA and OAT, in particular GPA, isn't just is every 365 better than a 364, but we also look at your course load. Were you taking 17, 18, 19 hours a term or 12 hours a term? Trending up or trending down, or level. These are all aspects that are reviewed. Difficulty of major, or when you're taking difficult loads, how have you done in that arena? Service leadership is also a factor. As far as, also along with that, I may add time management. As far as if you're taking 15, 16 hours a term and you're not only active with various service leadership, but if you're working 15, 20 hours a week or involved in other activities, it's a good indicator of time management, which is important. And then commitment to optometry, that involves your admissions interview, which is focused a lot on optometry. You're shadowing or working in the field. We want to make sure that we're admitting students that are committed to optometry and they've done your homework, for lack of better words. So that's an important aspect, that we're not only attracting students who have good academic credentials, but are also committed to the field of optometry. We have institutional scholarships and donor scholarships. Institutional scholarships are funds from I feel the college has been an excellent steward of our funding. And these are funds that are based upon, again, excellent academic achievement, typically more based upon academic work, OAT. We do have some donor scholarships and awards that may also be based on like the state. If an alum from South Carolina wants to establish a scholarship and give it to a student from South Carolina, or maybe a donor wants to award a scholarship based upon a student's performance in a certain clinical area like vision therapy or pediatrics. We have a nice spectrum of scholarships. So like even if a student does not enter with a scholarship, you can pick up a scholarship based upon your SCO track record. This slide here, I think is pretty impressive. $770,000 approximately in scholarships given to the entering class that's about to enter here in a few months. And this pie chart does give a little bit of a breakdown. We do have flexibility. Things like, for example, if you're applying for the entering class of 2023, this pie chart may look a little different than what it does now, but at least gives you an idea of scholarships ranging from $1,000 a year to $20,000 a year. And Brianna can definitely talk about the specific scholarship that she has that's even larger than that. I always call scholarship review admissions on steroids. It's the same process, just a higher standard. So for example, the average GPA OAT, if a student has, let's say, a 3.5 GPA and maybe a 310 or 320 on the OAT, that may be competitive for admission. But to be competitive for scholarship, you might have to be a little higher than that. And then on top of that, to be eligible for a scholarship that's $20,000 versus like maybe $3,000 would probably be more indicative of the characteristics I just talked about as far as GPA, OAT, commitment to the profession, service, leadership. So the stronger your file not only makes you more competitive for scholarship, but also more competitive for a higher amount scholarship. Some commonly asked questions we get here. There are no scholarship applications. We try to make this as simple and straightforward for you. So when you apply for admission, and let me stress, early application is very, as that third bullet points out, we encourage early application for general admission, but for scholarship consideration, I want to stress it even further, because once we're out of scholarship funds, we're out. So if a great applicant applies, let's say late February, we may be out of scholarship money, even though that student would be deserving. So early application is very strong. What we do from a timeline is, if you're invited, you apply, you're invited for an interview, and you are accepted. You will usually know your scholarship status within a few days after acceptance. That way, as you're evaluating any options from other schools as far as admission, at least with SCO, before you have to decide if you're going to submit a deposit or a commit to us, you'll know your scholarship status as well. So that way, at least if you hear back from us and you've received a $5, $10, $15, $20,000 scholarship, that could obviously be very influential in determining if you're coming to SCO. The second bullet I want to stress, because if you're from a contract state and you do get a contract seat, whether it be from a state like Georgia, Arkansas, Louisiana, et cetera, that's about a $20,000 grant or award toward your tuition. You can still receive a scholarship. It's just that, one, more scholarships are given to non-regional students. And then two, certainly the larger scholarships are given to non-regional. So if you get a contract seat, you're not going to get a $20,000 scholarship on top of that. The larger scholarships are almost always going to go to the students from non-regional states paying a higher tuition. So if you are from a contract state, you get a contract seat, you're still eligible. It's just that more go to non-regional, and certainly more of the higher go to non-regional. Certainly referenced about the advantage of early application. Also, I don't mind doing scholarship counseling. If you take the OAT over the summer and you contact the office and ask for me, and it might be a situation where your OAT is strong for admission, but an improved score might really elevate your chances for scholarship. And I'm very happy to counsel and talk to students about that. And then the last bullet there at the bottom, as far as the average GPA OAT, this is just averages, mean averages. So some higher, some lower, but a 3.8 GPA and a 348 for the OAT, where the averages for the class are just entered for scholarship consideration. The Scholars Excellence Award, which Brianna will definitely be able to tell you a little bit more about with her perspective. We do offer one full tuition scholarship for an exceptional underrepresented minority in each class. We've done this for 2 years now. As long as you're identified as an underrepresented minority on your OPCOMCAS application and then accepted, myself and a panel make the decision to review for this. Usually sometime in November, December is when this scholarship is historically awarded. We do have several scholarships that are based upon helping underrepresented minorities, the Minority Endowed Scholarship, the Dr. Betty Harville Scholarship, the Dr. Vaughn Parfit. There are other scholarships that if you were an underrepresented minority, you could obviously still be eligible for, but these are scholarships that are specifically earmarked or designated for underrepresented minorities. And then kind of shifting gears about contract seats, because it is, again, with our being a private school, College of Optometry, it's a little different than if you were attending a state university, whether you were in-state or out of state. But the regional contract program is, I'll kind of read along, tuition savings program for qualified students. In essence, it's to help you pay the equivalent of an in-state tuition or a reduced tuition. So like, again, if you're from a state like Arkansas, South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, in essence, Southern College of Optometry becomes the in-state school of optometry for that state, if you are a resident of that state. So that is just a very general, we also have contract seats from Tennessee and other states, but have differing amounts. Not all contract seats have the same value. In other words, whatever the state pays, in essence, we just pass it along to the student who's a resident of that state. Eligibility, who can apply? You must be a permanent resident of that state, typically a resident for at least 1 year. So it's sometimes a common question, can I become a Tennessee resident for Tennessee contract purposes? You can't, you have to be a resident of Tennessee 1 year prior to enrolling to be eligible for Tennessee contract seat eligibility, because the state of Tennessee gives us a finite amount of funding. And as you can imagine, the state would want its funding. Right now, we have about 65 students from the state of Tennessee. If all 480, I'm sorry, 540 students enrolled at Southern College of Optometry claim Tennessee, it would dilute the amount per student by so much that the born and raised Tennesseans or the legitimate Tennesseans would not get really a fair amount. And we certainly don't want to do that. There are a few states that you're obligated to return. Louisiana, Kansas, West Virginia come to mind. Where if you do, Mississippi, if you do accept a contract seat, that the state is expecting you to return for 4 years of service. This is the state's rule, not SCO's rule. So it's not something that we advocate for. But if a state like Louisiana or Mississippi says, well, it's the contingency on getting the funding, then we're simply passing that along. And there is a process that you go through during the application process to certify your residency to be eligible for a contract seat. And this is the amount I was referring earlier, that different states do have different amounts, and that can change. Like there's been pre-COVID, Kansas, for right there in the middle at 6,500, they were contemplating significantly going up in their award, which we would love to. West Virginia and Tennessee announced their amounts during the summer. Like for example, for the upcoming year, Tennessee nor West Virginia has officially determined the exact amount, although we do think it's going to be somewhere in the current range. But as you can see, Tennessee students, their contract seat is less than the SRAB seats of Arkansas, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina. So that's just a decision that the state of Tennessee did. It's certainly not ours. But whatever the state provides, we simply pass that amount along to the residents of that state. But the amounts can change over time. And for the SRAB, typically, it didn't go up this year, I think, because of COVID, but typically does go up a few $100s a year. And then, even though they're not contract state seats, there are some state-sponsored scholarships that it's between you and the state. So if you're from Kentucky, North Carolina, Virginia, or Colorado, those respective states do provide additional funding, but the states make the decisions. One thing I don't think I mentioned is the contract seats. During the admissions process, SCO, the college, will determine who gets the contract seat. So if you're from Arkansas or Georgia or South Carolina, et cetera, we will determine if your enrollment is with the contract seat. If you're from a state like Kentucky, North Carolina, Virginia, Colorado, you're eligible for these funds, but the state determines who gets those funds. The colleges of optometry do not have a say. So, but at the same time, as you can see, it is a significant amount of money that's eligible to you and certainly worth inquiring about. And then there are also some scholarship opportunities that are outside of SCO, federal. The post 9/11 GI Bill, as far as eligibility, if you were a family member, had a veteran of military status, you could qualify for that. But then you also have military scholarships, Indian Health Service, other federal scholarships that typically it covers full tuition and then also includes a living expense stipend. But then you would owe, like, for example, with both military and IHS, that if you were to receive a 3 or 4 year scholarship, you would owe the military or Indian Health Services 3 to 4 years, an equivalent number of years in practicing in those areas. So for example, if you received a Navy scholarship for 3 years, the Navy for 3 years would cover your full tuition, your living expenses as well. And in turn, you would owe the Navy 3 years of service. I believe commissioned as definitely commissioned as an officer. But that's just something that, again, would be between you and for the military, your local military recruiter, or the Indian Health Services through the IHS department. If you were eligible and wanted to qualify, reach into that, you could apply for those scholarship programs as well.
Alrighty, so that ends the overview from Mr. Hauser. We're now ready to turn over to Brianna to talk a little bit about her experience, and then we're going to come back after Brianna speaks for some general feedback from Mr. Hauser and Brianna, and to open it up for questions to both of them. Alrighty, Brianna, how about if you can go ahead and introduce yourself, where you're from, kind of what drew you to SCO, and then we'll get started with your questions.
All right, thank you guys. So I am Brianna. I'm mostly grew up around the Houston, Texas area. And I went to school up in Baltimore, and I became interested, SCO, like, honestly, wasn't, like, I just kind of went through the whole list of optometry schools and started, researching each one. And SCO was one I hadn't really heard too much about, and I really wasn't like super sure about it, but it had really strong like board passage rates, and I heard actually a lot about how happy people were with like the financial assistance that they do provide. And so those were some of the reasons that I was like, I'm going to go ahead and apply. And I felt like every interaction going forward from that with anyone from SCO was just really lovely and helpful. And it was just like not really like that for a lot of the other schools. And so that was one of the reasons that it was really at the top of my list. But I mean, I guess I'll definitely talk more about it in these other questions.
All righty, thank you. So let's jump in with when in the application process did you start researching scholarships or financial aid, or start considering scholarships and financial aid?
Yeah, that was something that I looked at pretty early on, because I guess to finish up the first question, I was not really interested in optometry until after I finished undergrad, was kind of when I discovered it. And so I was already like working, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do long term, and trying to figure out like what seemed like it made sense like financially. So when I first looked into optometry in general, that was kind of one of the first things I was looking at, was like how much it would cost and what, you know, the payoff would look like and everything. And SCO, well, yeah, I guess I was looking at just the scholarship page for every school that I was looking at. And I was really impressed, like I said, with SCO's just like such a long list of like very generous scholarships and grants. But yeah, I would say it was like one of the first things for me. And I know some other people, it was kind of like a secondary thing that you look at once you're already kind of choose your schools.
Alrighty, wonderful. And you talked a little bit about how, in general, SEO, when you were going through the admissions process, was very helpful. But how helpful do you feel SEO was regarding financial aid throughout the application process?
I guess during the application process itself, I wish I would have used SCO's financial aid more, because now that I'm here and I have worked, or you know, many times been up to the office and talked to Del Rita, and everyone there is just so helpful. They've cleared up a lot of, you know, any confusion I've had about anything about how the money is awarded or what you're eligible for, doing like work study. And anytime I've like communicated with them, it's been just like incredibly helpful. And I'm always like, man, I really should have just reached out to them earlier. So I actually didn't really talk to them much during the application process itself. But every time I've talked to them since then has been really great. So I highly encourage people to use that resource.
Great, thank you. How did receiving a scholarship impact your optometry school education overall?
Yeah, it had a huge impact. Like as I said, I was kind of looking at this stuff right at the beginning, and I really didn't expect to have the privilege of receiving such a generous scholarship. So I think the awards that SCO gives out, like it can really make a big difference if like going here versus other schools. Just thinking ahead, like after graduation, knowing I'm going to have so much less debt, and knowing that SCO graduates have never had to default on their loans, and like how helpful the people in financial aid have been anytime I've had any worries, or any of my friends have had any worries. It just like it's also allowed me to kind of just like really focus in on school while I'm here, and not be as concerned with like trying to, you know, work in every free minute I have to try to help with, you know, decrease the loans. I think that's been one of the biggest things, that it just really takes that pressure off, and allows me to just like focus in on school, and focus in on figuring out what I want to do within optometry and with my future, and really like make connections here, and not have this like underlying like anxiety about the student debt.
Thank you. And what does the Scholars Excellence Award specifically mean to you?
I think that award, I'm just like incredibly honored to have been given that award. And as the first recipient, I know when Joe Hauser first called me to tell me about it, I just like was just in total disbelief. I think, I'm very proud, of course, to have been given this award. It covers full tuition for all 4 years that I'm here. So it was really wonderful. I think that, as Joe Hauser talked a little bit about earlier, that SCO just they look at your academic record and your past experience with optometry, and your passion for the profession. I got to have an interview. I imagine you guys still do probably the similar, or are you guys doing, is it virtual interviews still?
Last year we had both, virtual and in person.
Oh, it's been both. Okay. So, well, in my interview process, which was virtual since it was earlier during COVID, I had like 3 different calls, like one with the faculty, one with the admissions person. And it was cool to get to talk to everybody. And I feel like I really got a chance to kind of connect and for them to really get to know me and see why I'm interested in optometry and SCO. So I think that played a role too. But yes, I mean, like I said, just receiving this award has been a huge impact on my education.
Thank you. And what advice or recommendations would you give to students researching scholarship and financial aid resources for optometry school, and maybe even any general advice you would offer students who are just looking at optometry school admissions overall?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the way I went about it, I just pretty much every school has a lot of good information on their website about what scholarships they offer, and you can kind of get a sense of like how many and how much, and then I would definitely say, as I said that I didn't do, I wish I would have talked to financial aid at SCO and potentially at other schools early, like during the admissions process, because I think they would have been really helpful. And there's also been, SCO has a lot of webinars about these types of things, like this one. And some other schools I think had some, but SCO is, I remember having like just so many of these like really great informative webinar series. So I think all of those are like great things that you can do. But yeah, I think schools usually talk about what types of scholarships they have available and kind of how it works, and they're usually really happy to talk about those things. But I guess I'll just end this question with just saying that I think SCO, one of the biggest things that draws people here is how great the scholarship opportunities are, along with everything else that's great about the school, but that's just kind of like the cherry on top. And so I think that it's good to like do your research and kind of get a sense of the schools where that's kind of the thing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brianna. So now we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions for both Mr. Hauser and Brianna, if our attendees have any questions for them. Also, if either of you have any last comments you'd like to end with or offer up before we close out, but we are opening it up for questions. And for our attendees, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and we'll see both of them very clearly. But while we wait on questions, Mr. Hauser, do you have any last comments or recommendations?
Sorry, I was muted there. To kind of echo what Brianna was saying, was just do your homework and due diligence, or if you just have general questions, contacting us, contacting any other excuse me, schools that you're interested in. Because in our case, I can definitely attest that we can give some guidance on, even before you apply, your potential scholarship status, what kind of level of scholarships you might be looking at based upon the file so far, and or, as I referenced earlier, if there's any area or time to improve, whether it be retaking the OAT or submitting grades or getting some additional shadowing experience or whatever it may be, we're happy to provide that insight. That way, as you're applying, at least you have an idea of where you stand, so that when you're notified of acceptance, and if you're notified about a scholarship opportunity, hopefully it wouldn't be a major surprise to you.
Alrighty, thank you. Well, I'm not seeing any questions currently, but of course, Mr. Hauser is open for any communication if you're needing to reach out with any questions, as are all of us within our office. So if there are no questions, I believe we can go ahead and close out for today. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. I know we have covered a lot of information, but I hope this experience has been of assistance as you all start on your optometric journey. Our next webinar will actually not be a webinar, but rather the SCO optometry virtual meeting. During this event, students will be able to speak with representatives from not only SCO, but dozens of other optometry schools throughout the nation. This will take place on June 2nd, and for more information, please visit futureeyedoc.org. If you haven't done so already, I invite you to request more information by signing up for our inquiry form. You will receive a personal advisor and a personal brochure with information relevant to your goals and experiences. Thank you so much to Mr. Hauser and Brianna for sharing their time and experiences, and a special thank you for all of our attendees who have joined us and all of those who will be watching this webinar after the fact. We hope to see you all at the next webinar in July, but in the meantime, have a great rest of your week and take care.